Okay, well, thank you to everybody who has come and who is attending the talk. Glad to see lots of masks, so thank you for keeping yourselves and everyone safe. Really appreciate it. I'm sorry I can't be with you, but Steph and I are both still shielding in the COVID thing. We haven't been out of the house for quite a while, and when we do, Steph wears sort of 3 layers of mask because of medication. So. We're hopeful to see you again in April in the Wakefield show. Hopefully things will be a little bit calmer by then. But for now, it's nice to be able to sort of see you and address you all. And thank you to the show organisers for putting this video in. Really appreciate it for that. Okay, so we'll just go over a few of the new things that our Interactive have. As many of you know, I spend a lot of time doing the RISC OS development stuff, but I think Richard's got you covered on all things RISC OS developments. So this talk will be concentrating on what I do as RComp rather than concentrating on any of the RISC OS development stuff. We'll start with a new product at the show. I'm going to first do a bit of a screen share onto my Forte. So if I click screen share and then click that window and share, hopefully you now see a computer desktop. Yep. Great stuff. The miracles of modern technology. So we'll start with the +1 add-on that we've announced for the Pi 400 and the Raspberry Pi 4. This is a hardware PCB with a cartridge-style case to it. Named the +1 for a variety of reasons. One is a callback to Acorn's upgrade to the old Acorn Electron, which is sort of, in many ways, is a precursor or a distant ancestor of the modern day Pi 400. And also because the +1 represents being able to use another operating system alongside RISC OS on the Pi 400, or Pi 4 for that matter. The board provides basically a switching system to allow you to select which operating system gets booted when you turn on your computer. You can see that there is a hardware switch, which lets you select the 2 operating systems. And this is handled by the GPIO pins, so that you basically send a high or a low signal to the GPIO pin. And when the Pi turns on, it senses this and it chooses whichever operating system appropriately. Additionally, there is a battery backed up real-time clock module in there, so that your computer will retain the time between sessions. So it's combining basically 2 extremely useful elements into one neatly packaged, neatly presented add-on board for your Pi 400 or your Pi 4. Because the switching between the operating systems, which could be Linux or it could be the versions of Windows 11 for the for ARM and Pi-based devices. So you've got a selection of operating systems you could use, but because that may not be something that you're familiar with, the product also includes instructions and downloads and everything you need to get started doing that across multiple operating systems. If you're still not sure, we can also provide bundles of the +1 with operating systems and SD cards and things, so that it's all set up and literally all you have to do is plug things in and off you go with multiple operating systems on your Pi 400 or Pi 4. We went with the hardware selection system for selecting the operating system because we felt that it gave people a physical control over which operating system they would prefer. I have seen it done in software. Our concern is that if you go the software route, you potentially have to rewrite sort of critical system files on the SD card. And when I've been doing development of things like Forte tools, PyTools, I've seen that it's all too easy for those files to get corrupted if you're not careful, or if things just don't happen just at the right times. And what we were concerned was that if you went software route, then potentially you could get stuck in one operating system or another, or in a worst case scenario, no operating system at all. So by using the physical switch, there's no changes required to the boot card, and if you boot into Linux and you're absolutely panicking, you don't know what to do, and you don't like it, you can literally just turn off the computer, click the switch back, then you're back to discuss the next time you turn on. So I think it simplifies things. There are pros and cons to both methods, but perhaps it's the Luddite in me, but the physicalness of being able to select which one you use by a physical switch, to me is a clear and straightforward way of doing things. So that's plus one. It's available bareboard £25 or with a case for 30. Bear in mind all our prices include VAT. If you're watching this on video later overseas, because we've VAT registered, all products that you see with prices here will be VAT free when sold overseas. The second thing, I'm going to oscillate between hardware and software products a bit so that we get a bit of variety. Next thing I'm going to show is Fireworks Pro, which we will launch 2.31 this week. Fireworks Pro upgrade is actually a mixture of a couple of elements. We've got Fireworks Pro 2.31, and we also have a new element to it called Webworks. Webworks is a program that was originally developed by Paul Weige back in the sort of late 2000s, just before his death. And we came across it recently, and in liaison with Andrew Conroy, who has been sort of maintaining Paul's library of software over the last 10 years, we've gone in and been able to sort of bring it back from somewhat obscurity. We've removed the shareware copy protection, and we got the Fireworks Pro programmer Stuart Swales involved, and he's been able to suggest some more improvements and enhancements based on his knowledge of how Fireworks works. So we've been able to sort of bring Webworks on quite nicely, fix some problems, and sort of hopefully do justice to what Paul had in mind for the program. So we'll talk a little bit about Fireworks Pro 2.31 first. There will be some repetition for those who've seen previous talks. I apologise because this is the first in-person show for a couple of years, so some of what you're going to see is 2.30 stuff, but I think it's worth looking at in examples. For those not familiar with Fireworks, it's a word processor, it's a spreadsheet, it's a database, it's a tabling tool. One of the nice things that we added in 2.30 was the table sheet layout, which is a default document that you can use as a template for doing tabling in Fireworks. The idea being to show how you can use Fireworks as both a spreadsheet and a tabling tool, which you can then use to create tables for use in other documents. And of course, the tables that you create in Fireworks are rather smarter than the tables you might create in something like TableMate, because they are in fact full spreadsheets with dynamic capabilities like charts and graphs. You can use a full range of Fireworks' extensive formulas, and so basically you have the power of a spreadsheet in a table. It's a very basic method. We can take this table and then we can place that table directly into a word processor or a DTP package of your choice. I'm using TechWriter here, but you could use Ovation Pro or you could use Impression Publisher. And we can simply take that data and drop that into our favourite programme, preserving the layout and tabling that we created. But as I say, these are dynamic, so not only can we take that data, but we can edit that data, and we can then change that. When we save it, the content in the original document changes. But it goes a bit further than that, because quite often what you want is not so much the raw data visible, but the results of the data. So we can take this information and we can say, well, actually what we like is, I'll do a different type of graph to normal. So let's do a pie chart. Doesn't really make much sense, but we'll do a pie chart rather than the bar chart or line graph that I tend to use. So there's our chart. I'll put it onto the second page. So it's clearer if we do that. Oops, what's going on there? Maybe pie charts are not the one to choose. So there we have our pie chart, and then we can save that also into our word processor. And because that chart is dynamic and data driven, although we're only seeing the chart there in TechWriter, all the data that produce that chart is present underneath. So later on we can go and say, well, actually the temperature on Tuesday was only 10 degrees. And when we save that, we can see that our chart updates accordingly within our TechWriter document. So this means that not only can you use Fireworks to make tables, but you can also use it to do database presentation in there, and know that you can go in later and make modifications without having to necessarily keep separate copies of the spreadsheet, separate draw files, separate draw files, and so forth. New in 2.31, we have made significant changes to the import and export of Microsoft Excel documents. Particularly on the Excel front, though, we discovered that there were some limitations on the sizes of files that you could export out of Fireworks. But if you loaded in a significant amount of data into Fireworks, for example, even some bank statements and things would generate quite large files. And if you tried to save those as Excel files, that wouldn't work. So in the latest version of Fireworks, we massively increased the size of the files that we can export out of Fireworks as Excel. We've also improved the quality of those Excel outputs because we found that some of them would fail validation in the latest versions of Microsoft Excel. That's no longer the case, they now work fine. And on the import front, we have improved the importing. We now support sort of empty padding rows and columns in the sheets, and various other things. Off the top of my head, I'm forgetting, but there'll be various improvements to the import and the export elements. There are also improvements to the spreadsheet itself, especially with some of the mathematical functions from matrices, and also complex number handling has been improved too. So, all in all, I think a worthwhile upgrade. The upgrade is free of charge to anybody who has got 2.31. Sorry, 2.30. If you haven't already upgraded to 2.30, then you can do so at the show. If you have 2.30 already, you can download 2.31 on Pinebook as a free upgrade. But we also have CDs for both Fireworks and Messenger at the show. You can have a totally new CD with all the goodies on for £7 at the show. We've tried to price that so that if you, even if you sort of nothing but else takes your fancy a new CD, it should be quite affordable, I hope. moving on to Webworks, it takes a Fireworks document and allows you to generate HTML content for use on the web or even transferring to other platforms where you can load an HTML file into another application. It's worth saying that Fireworks is, since version 2 has had the ability to create PDFs as well. So this is not your only route to putting your Fireworks documents on the web. The Fireworks CD edition includes our PDF making software as a bonus item. So basically you can generate PDFs out of your own Fireworks documents. But the downside of that is that once they're PDF, they're sort of somewhat set in stone. Whereas with HTML, you can adapt the HTML and you can incorporate it into other documents on your website. So for example, if you wanted to use Fireworks to make some tables, which you then incorporated into other web pages, then this is exactly the tool you need. So if we go to Webworks, or you can take the original example, I have absolutely no idea how the example will fail. If we just drop that into there and click process, we'll see that it's created both an index.html and a default.css. The CSS cascading style sheet file is used to convert all the custom styles that you make in your Fireworks document into cascading style sheet styles for use in HTML. This means it's very much worth using styles over effects when using in conjunction with Webworks, because each style in the Fireworks document will be converted to a CSS style and then will be applied sensibly in the HTML. So you can see that our table of information that we had previously has been converted into a HTML document. There are a variety of examples. For example, if you want to do coloured cells, we have the 2x2 coloured example, where you can see our 2x2 spreadsheet is converting into appropriate colours. Letter 1 shows a table with some bols, and down here, this section here is actually how we do links. And set up links between documents with Webworks. So we can drag in letter 1, process that, and there you can see the example file. You can see things like the bold and underline, you can see the link that I mentioned, and so on. I got asked after the last talk, why did the text appear in Hobbiton rather than Trinity? And this is because the base font in Fireworks, if you don't apply any specific fonts, is a serif font, whereas in most web browsers the base font is a sans serif font. So rather than forcibly applying the change in base font, which might not be what you want to fit in the rest of the text, Webworks retains the base fonts provided by your browser, so that if a user has changed the base fonts, that's preserved in the rendering of base font in the Fireworks document too. So yeah, I won't go. I think we're on quite a limited time, so I won't go too much further on that. But I hope you'll agree that that's a nice little addition to Fireworks, and that sort of bringing that back, we're able to be a nice little tribute to Paul all these years later. Right, back to hardware now for a second. The next thing to show is a future product rather than current one, which is our ITX design for the Pi4 compute module. Let's zoom in a wee bit. This is a project that is being hampered by the current component shortage that exists within the electronics industry. For those who don't know, lead times on electronic components these days are measured in months and so on, and years in some cases, but predominantly measured in months, due to basically a year of non-production effectively, and then of course once there isn't any production happening, when production starts back up again, everybody and his dog wants the components, so they can't manufacture them quick enough, and those that get snapped up by large corporations, and those of us who only want small numbers are left with just sort of the pickings of that are available. So we've been a little bit stymied. The board design has actually been finished since shortly after the last Wakefield show, to be perfectly honest. But we're just sort of in the process of gathering components as and when we can find them to add to the sort of component heap, so that we can manufacture the boards in due course. What's key to this board design is that it's a no-compromise design. If you're familiar with the Raspberry Pi 4, you'll know that it's a very fast processor and it's hamstrung by its I/O options. If you're on Linux, you do a little bit better with a USB 3 controller, so you can at least put a USB 3 drive on and get slightly faster performance. But ultimately, for RISC OS users, it's SD card or it's USB 2.0. And neither of these are particularly desirable. USB 2.0 is hamstrung by the fact that reads and writes can't happen at the same time on USB 2.0. So, if you're writing to it, it requires significant back and forth on the USB bus to do each write. So instead of getting the sort of quite good performance that you see on paper when you look at what should be possible, in practice you get performance that is can be less than the SD card due to all the overheads. Similarly, on reading, you rarely get anything approaching what you should be able to do on reading with the USB 2 subsystem. So we were very keen to create a design that would remove these bottlenecks from the Pi and generate something that's more akin to a full computer experience. And so what the ITX compute board does is to present the Pi in a standardized format. The ITX form factor is used by many sort of smaller cases in the real world, as it were, in modern PC case design. I think it can also be put into most small towers as well. So it's a flexible form factor. And what we've done is to take the PCI Express lanes that the Pi Compute module offers, which would normally on a normal Raspberry Pi 4, it would go into a USB 3 controller, and that's all it would do. And what we've done is to put an expensive high-performance switch onto there, which basically allows those PCI Express lanes to be connected to multiple devices, and each device gets the full bandwidth, as it were. What we have here on the left here is a PCI Express physical connector, so that you could put a PCI Express expansion card in. In the centre here, with the M.2 slot and the 3 SATA connections, we have full-speed SATA connections, allowing for SSDs and CD drives and things. And then we still, at the top here, you can see a little hint of blue. We have USB 3 ports as well for external connectivity, just like an ordinary Pi 4 would do. So basically, we're trying to give all 3 possibilities on the one board and give full bandwidth to each element to ensure that you get the maximum performance. I've seen other designs where they try to use USB 2 as a sort of base level thing for adding things like SATA. But of course, then you're just sort of crippling yourself in the same way you would on a Raspberry Pi 4 board with a USB to SATA connector. And frankly, if you're going to go to the expense of making a board, I think it's worth the extra to deliver a no-compromise solution, because otherwise, why not just use an ordinary Raspberry Pi 4 board, or the Raspberry Pi Compute module carrier board that the Raspberry Pi Foundation offer? I think it's important to create something that's future-proof and opens up the maximum amount of opportunities for RISC OS. The board is being designed primarily for RISC OS, but of course you could run Linux or other operating systems on there. There are a broad range of connectors on the board for fans and USB, additional USB headers, USB headers here. You can see the 40-pin GPIO here, so it's compatible with apps. You've got the fan headers, loading section to, because we've seen in the past that power supplies often don't like low power ARM boards, so we put scope for putting additional load on the board to try and deal with power supplies that are not particularly friendly to low power ARM boards. This may not be familiar, this section here may not be familiar to people. RISC OS uses a tendency solid-state disks in their sort of credit card sized 2.5-inch form factor, but outside of those drives, the rest of the world has moved to a connector called M.2 as well. I mean, it's not to say the other drives are not still available, they very much still are, but the M.2 drives have become preferred form factor, particularly for laptops, because it's smaller and more compact. Basically, M.2 is this sort of rectangular shape that you can see outlined here. And it comes in different lengths, hence the different screw holes. And basically, these drives essentially you just get a circuit board that you plug into the motherboard, and that means that you don't, if you've had a very compact case, literally you can have the storage just clip straight onto the board, and you don't need to have all the cables going out to additional drives that you would in a regular desktop computer. That means that you can use in a low profile case effectively. So yeah, so this is the compute board, which we expect to be available, all being well, during the next 6 months, hopefully the early part of 2022. But with the electronics industry in the way it is, I don't want to make promises on timescales, because it's one of those things where whatever you say, you're probably going to be wrong. Right.
What's the guesstimate on the price of it?
Sorry?
What do you expect the price of it to be?
It's very difficult to say at this stage, I'm afraid, because with the prices on the components fluctuating based on literally what, you grab the components when you can at pretty much whatever price you can because of the availability. It's not going to be dirt cheap because those PCI Express switch parts that I talked about are expensive. They're found on very high-end PC motherboards, and they're why some of the high-end PC motherboards cost an arm and a leg. But that doesn't mean these boards are going to cost an arm and a leg, because the basics of doing it are considerably cheaper. So if I had to make a guess, I would be saying not cheaper than 150 quid, not more expensive than 300, but that's a very wide ballpark. I'm sorry if that seems unhelpful, but I think anybody attempting to put prices on these kind of things at this time, given how the electronics industry is quite foolish, because the chances of being able to produce a board and components for one price today are going to be very different tomorrow. So until I've got the final boards populated in my hands, any attempt to give you a price would be, I think, premature. I'm sorry if that's not the answer you're looking for, but it's the honest answer. I don't intend to try and make them super expensive, and that's not the objective of the exercise. On the other hand, this will be one of the most financially expensive projects that we've ever undertaken, so it will need to break even. Otherwise, it could go very horribly wrong. So we'll price accordingly, but do our best, because obviously anything Pi related, there is a sort of assumption of a level of affordability on it. But this is an attempt to take the Pi technology and basically make it be as good as possible in order to create experiences that are rivaling boards costing many times more, and delivering the absolute best we can within the limitations of 32-bit RISC OS 5. Yeah, it'll cost what it'll cost, I'm afraid.
Okay.
Any other questions on the ITX board before I move on? Because it does seem like having some questions now rather than waiting till the end could be a... No? Okay. Right, so the next thing I'll move on to is a brief bit about Messenger Pro. We've launched Messenger Pro 8.05 at the show. Where are we? Oh, look. I made this mistake the other day. So basically, the main enhancements in 8.05 over the previous versions are not ones that I can actually demonstrate because they are essentially lots and lots of little tweaks and alterations relating to zero-page fixes. RISC OS 5.28, possibly 2.6, but 2, but certainly 5.28 requires applications to be to not make access to the zero page for stability reasons. Messenger had a few of these gremlins in it. Due to the way RISC OS 5 works, you wouldn't have actually encountered any problems, I don't think, as a result of it, because RISC OS 5 would quietly handle any such issues. But by going through and fixing these, the program can only be better as a result of these improvements. So big thanks to Dave Higton for his work on that. It was really appreciated, and we're glad to be able to roll those into the new version, which should make it more stable and better. Although, as I say, it's difficult to really know because I didn't have any crashes with it before. The other change, which I think is a bit more noticeable for people who are using it on things like Raspberry Pis, is that performance on SD card-based systems should be considerably nippier in 8.05. Basically, it now uses a level of caching and read ahead on disk operations. So anything involved in reading and writing should now be significantly faster. So both opening emails, dealing with attachments and what have you, all of those things should open more or less immediately. So, I did a quick example the other day of doing an attachment where I just drop it in. And basically, immediately that message appears, and you can see that it's opening and handling it instantaneously, effectively, despite the fact that we're running on SDFS, which, as I say, traditionally would have been a wee bit slower. So basically, 8.05 Messenger, again, like the Fireworks upgrade, it's a free upgrade to anybody who has Messenger Pro 8. You can download it on ThinkStore. But we also have fresh CDs at the show. And if you buy it on CD, you also get the Windows version and the Mac version of Messenger Pro free of charge on the CD as well. So that's quite a sort of nice little package on the Messenger Pro 8 CDs that you can grab at the show. If you're a Messenger Pro user. Back to hardware, as you can see, this whole demo has been done on one of our Forte computers. We launched these about a year ago now during lockdown, and basically they found a high-performance Raspberry Pi 4 system with a broad range of software and unique tools like Forte tool software, which you can use to configure your computer. change the display options, set it to run legacy games if you want, set up networking, auto configure networking. For example, what I'm doing now to show you this via Zoom is using the automated VNC element, which allows you to share your desktop across a network. So I'm in fact sat in front of a Windows box, but the Forte is sat on the other side of the room, but I can interact with it and use it directly via VNC. Now that's not unique to Forte tools, but what's special is that we can set it all up with a tick of a button, and then whenever I turn on the computer, that will be active, and I can remote in the password on demand and utilise my Forte wherever I wish. We've also added a headless mode, so you don't even need a monitor connected to your Forte. You can just literally have it sat under your desk and access it over the network, which can be convenient if you've got a sort of large number of computers. Being able to access them all remotely is jolly useful. The Forte comes with a huge range of software. All of the Archon big hitters, for example, Messenger, Data Power, JSTOR, I'm just trying to think, Fireworks Pro, all included as standard on the Forte, alongside the Forte tools, and we use a dual drive system that allows you to get the best performance out of it. I talked earlier about how Pi devices can be a bit hamstrung on the disk I/O, which can cause quite long load times. The system incorporates a dual drive approach so that we can use an accelerator drive to make things faster. So for example, if I load the Forte browser from the SD card, we should see how this, I didn't do this demonstration the other day, so this may fall flat because that's a while since I've done it. So if I look in the network, do we have Forte browse? But if I run it from SDFS, we time it, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, about 14 seconds to the icon bar. So that took quite a while. I'll now kill the shared object manager so we're not faking it. If we run the same thing from the turbo drive, you can see it loads much more quickly. I didn't even have time to count it. And that's why we use the dual drive approach with the Forte, so that performance elements that may cause applications or data handling to be slower on SDFS can be offset with the turbo drive. And additionally, because the turbo drive is a separate drive, we can also use that for backup and recovery. Obviously, the safe store system will back up your data, and additionally, we provide a full recovery system on there so that you can recover your machine if any of your drives goes down. Obviously, we hope you don't have to ever use that, but I think by covering all our bases, then having a system where you can recover from one drive to the other makes a huge amount of sense in a modern computer. The Forte comes with a custom designed case, power switch, USB ports on both the back and the front, so you can plug things into the front of your computer, just like you would expect on a modern computer. The latest design even has USB-C ports, which is what mobile phones and things use. So you've got a wide variety of ports on there, monitor connections. You can do graphics up to 4K at 60 Hz. You can do super wide stuff. Forte includes all the wireless software to do super wide monitors, our multi-mod technology, and our custom monitor definition files that we use to do the extra wide monitors. So you're basically covered for pretty much any kind of monitor that you want to connect into the Forte. You've got a wide variety of USB ports for further expansion. You've got a high-speed gigabit Ethernet port for networking. You could add the Raspberry Pi, the LSR hat for Wi-Fi if you want. Although I must admit I tend to prefer to hardwire myself, simply because of the sheer speed of the gigabit Ethernet port. It's just so much faster. And if you're using any of the network features, especially the remote access, then having the high-speed gigabit Ethernet is really fantastic. So yeah, basically whatever you want to do with things, Forte has got you covered at the price that is much cheaper than any of our other RISC OS computers that we've done previously. That's not to say that machines like Time Machine and the Titan that we offer, or the venerable ARM-X6, are not excellent candidates. But for the price of what you can do, Forte represents amazing bang for buck. In benchmarks that aren't disk-IO bound, it can generally hold court with the Time Machine and Titan, which costs 3-4 times as much money as the Forte. So yeah, Forte available now, and you'll probably see one or two around the hall, I should think, in your travels. Now, let me have a quick look and see what I've forgotten to talk about. Yes, okay, there's that. Forte the tools that I've just mentioned, we do, because we had quite a lot of people asking could they'd already bought Raspberry Pis on their own, direct from Farnell or wherever. They said, what about Forte tools? Could we have Forte tools for our Raspberry Pis? So basically, we've done a spin-off of Forte tools as a separate purchase. If you want to run equivalent to Forte tools on your own Raspberry Pi, we have Pi tools, which you can see looks very similar to Forte tools. And Pi tools is available on Plink Store, and you can buy slips to show, I believe, or failing that, as I say, on Plink Store. And that allows you to get the advantages of that particular piece of software on a bare Raspberry Pi 4, or it's particularly useful on the Pi 400 because it has a number of features to allow you to deal with the limited keyboard that's present on the Pi 400. The Pi 400 is missing a couple of keys that you would find quite useful in RISC OS. And if you use Pi tools with it, then you will be able to neatly work around the limitations of the Pi 400 keyboard just by ticking a couple of buttons. So yeah, Pi tools also available now, and contains essentially a lot of the tech that we would bundle with Forte. Not everything, because obviously the commercial software is not included in Pi tools, but you get basic stuff. You get things like the monster definition files, and you get the firmware files, operating system, etc. So lots of good stuff in Pi tools if you already have a Pi system of your own. And then final thing I'll talk about here are elements related to the Pinebook Pro. I'm going to turn off the remote viewer for now, so it should be back to me talking against the background. Firstly, a bit of news that if you saw my live stream midweek, I haven't told you already. I got a lovely surprise from Ben Avison on abroad, although not with his real hat on Friday, which was an update for the original Pinebook processor, Pinebook laptop, which improves the SDIO performance significantly, and unlocks things like the more eMMC chips, so that you can use the eMMC from RISC OS, doubles the disk performance on the original Pinebook laptops that we've been selling the last sort of couple of years. So I'm not quite sure when that will be available publicly, but once that's ready, that is a significant upgrade for the original Pinebook, and should unlock a number of additional features. There are some other surprises in there that may, if you like the stock commands, may yield some fun results. But suffice to say, significant performance boosts on the original Pinebook. And as I say, if you decide that you don't like running Linux on it, then you can, or you feel like partitioning your Linux drive, then you can access the eMMC chip built into the Pinebook from RISC OS. But of course, what comes next from the Pinebook? My answer to you on that, I will turn the virtual background off so you can see this more clearly. Virtual background, click none, and you can see my horrendous office. And if I close that and try and get my lefts and rights not mixed up, hopefully you can see the Pinebook Pro. This uses a brand new chip that is significantly faster. Theoretically, I believe it's faster than even something like the Pi 4. It has a larger 14-inch screen. It has a nicer aluminium body. It has a UK keyboard that is larger keys, nicer to type on. And you can see it running RISC OS. So this is very hard to demonstrate sideways, as it were. There we are. So you can see, I can do the infamous Apple. So you can see it doing RISC OS stuff. I don't know. I think all you need to really see is that it's running RISC OS programs. And I'm controlling it with the touchpad, and it's doing stuff. Basically, this is sort of work in progress. There are essentially 3 USB ports on the unit, one on the right here, one on the left here, and also USB-C on the left here. The USB port over here works just fine, but the ones over here on the right, on the left-hand side are controlled by USB 3 controllers. So working ongoing at the moment to get those functioning sensibly. Beyond that, we also need to work on the power management side. That's a little bit more complicated, but more advanced as well than that which was present on the original Pinebook. So obviously we're working towards that. And the other feature that this offers that the original one didn't is the option for high-speed M.2 NVMe storage. So you can put one of those drives that I was talking about that clipped onto the motherboard of the ITX board. You can, same form factor, actually slightly more advanced version of the tech, can go into the Pinebook Pro to give you high-speed storage in a Pinebook Pro. But that is still also work in progress. So that's why this is not available just yet. Coupled with, and you've heard these words before, electronic component shortage. The Pinebook Pros are difficult to get hold of at the moment, although they were saying back in August that hopefully by the year end there should be another production run done, all being well. So obviously we're going to be doing our best to get hold of those for RISC OS users, so that we have a supply of these in the new year to offer to people once the port is nice and sharp. But as you can see, it is basically working. It's actually the RISC OS implementation is a step beyond what we did on the original Pinebook. On the original Pinebook, we used something called U-boot to actually kickstart the board, which meant that boot of the Pinebook took just a bit, sort of 5-10 seconds longer than we would have liked. On the Pinebook Pro, we are rescuing the hardware directly, so RISC OS can actually bring up the hardware directly. We don't need to go through a U-boot phase to actually get the RISC OS kick-started. The Pinebook Pro literally kicks straight into RISC OS, giving us the fastest boot up times and giving us much finer grain control over the hardware as well. So that should allow the Pinebook Pro experience to be really great. But obviously, still a fair bit of work to go on there. Hopefully you'll be seeing more of this in 2022. So, yeah. I will put that over here. And I will set the virtual background back. And I will stop talking there because it is now 10 to 3. And if anybody has any further questions or wants to ask anything, or if there's anything that wasn't answered in the RISC OS development talk that you would like me to answer relating to RISC OS development, please feel free to ask.
Someone at the back.
Yes, Andrew.
Yeah.
Pinebook, the original Pinebook, has an HDMI connector, a mini HDMI or something. Will that ever be available to duplicate the screen to a projector?
It's still something I would like. It's still something I would like to see. You'll note that it's actually taped off because the shipping version of Linux that they put with it couldn't do that. But I believe the Manjaro Linux that they've sort of moved to later on could do something with that port. So it's not beyond the realms of possibility. And actually, we did actually get it working as an alternative out, but not duplicate. Duplication, I think, would be a challenge too far.
Right.
But being able to switch the video from the onboard screen to the external HDMI, we've actually had that work by accident on one of the units. We had a unit that the screen didn't respond within the expected time frame. So when you powered it on, obviously the screen was not responding within the let's say 50 millisecond window that it was expecting to get the screen responding in. And so the Pinebook was actually hard shifting its video output to the HDMI connector because it didn't think the screen was attached. We ultimately fixed that in the firmware by forcing it to always use the screen in preference, and that allowed that particular Pinebook to work correctly and use its screen normally, because obviously it was coming off, it was just taking a few milliseconds too long. So at the moment it is hardwired in the firmware that way, but the very fact that it was able to happen when the firmware was detecting no screen suggests that it ought to be possible to, at the very least, produce a version of the firmware that forces it to the HDMI instead of to the screen, for example. So you could have an SD card that you plug in to get the monitor, the HDMI, an SD card that you plug in to do the onboard, at the very least. Although it's always the problem is time. That the people who are working on this are working on 10 other projects at the same time, and trying to get all of that sorted and get that done. Is a challenge, shall we say. So I won't promise, but it's still something that, I mean, you can tell from what I was just talking about, Pinebook, it's still a product that we care about and we are interested in, so it's not forgotten. Also, we're going to be hopefully by the end of the year, all the Pinebook source code will be back in the rule repository, so that should be nice and open sourced by the year end as well. So existing Pinebooks should be well looked after both now and going forwards as well.
And is there any plan to improve the boot of the original Pinebook so that it doesn't use U-boot? That's what you said.
I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear that.
Okay, sorry. You mentioned a Pinebook Pro would boot directly into RISC OS.
Yeah.
Is there a plan to make the original Pinebook do the same?
That may come with the HDMI stuff in all honesty.
Yeah.
again, but I don't want to be pinned to that because there are, in how we've implemented the Pinebook, it's fairly reliant on the U-boot to actually initialize systems. And I think it would be quite a lot of work to make it completely independent. The reason why we had to do it on the Pinebook Pro was simply that U-boot doesn't initialize things like the screen on the Pinebook hardware, so Pinebook Pro hardware. So in other words, you wouldn't have got a picture if you hadn't done it the way we've done it on the Pinebook Pro. So it was, in a sense, necessarily evil, but it also meant sort of 3 or 4 months of additional wrangling of code to get it all sorted. So there was, again, we're back to a time element of for something like that, what are the benefits it's going to give versus the time that would need to be spent to do it, versus things like HDMI versus all the various other projects that we need to get sorted. And you know, what we're trying to do, I'm sort of doing a risk cost development cap now a little bit, but the reason I'm mentioning that in this context is that the programmer who's doing that is also doing work for risk cost development as well. There's a lot of areas where risk cost needs improving. There's lots of things we need to get sorted and get wrangled. And there's a limited time frame on 32-bit architecture. So we've got a lot of work cut out for us in the next sort of 5 years. And trying to figure out how best to divvy the time up in a ways that yields real positive results for owners of existing hardware and new hardware is a challenge. And I'm not going to say we'll get that right, but we have to sort of say, is there a quick way to get the HDMI working? If so, let's grab that and do that. But then maybe not do a ground level implementation of all the systems on the original Pinebook, which unfortunately we can't buy anymore. When the existing Pinebook already works, really well as is. So it's not like the wrangling would necessarily yield you a wildly different experience. It would not, as I say, 5 seconds off the time. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think we're now going to have to close this session, Andrew.
Oh.
We've got you've got about 3 minutes till the next speaker pops in.
I know Mark had is it Mark in the back? A little bit fuzzy, but is that Mark at the back? Or back left?
Nope.
Maybe not. In the maroon top, had a question earlier.
I was going to ask. You mentioned there were multiple colours on the Forte.
Oh.
The pre-show one, but you didn't mention that. I wondered if that was an addition. I haven't been to see yet, but I was quite interested in the different colours.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Yes, that was something I missed out in that portion of the talk. We have introduced a black model. We're also doing overclock models, if you wish. As I know people seem to like to overclock my systems. Personally, I keep mine at stock clock because there's a reason why the Pi Foundation doesn't sort of sell them at higher clock speeds. We do fit extra cooling on the Pi, on the Fortes and things anyway. And we do, on the overclock models, you can have a passive overclock unit, or you can have one with a fan, if you so desire. So you do have options, but on the other hand, it is very, very fast without the overclock. And I think, it's up to users, but personally, I probably prefer the extended lifespan of a non-overclock unit itself. But if you want to go to the overclock, get the extra performance, then you can get sort of 20% extra out of a with the turbocharged ones. And I sort of had in my head, although you don't have to. I imagine the black and red ones being sort of the boy racer model, as it were, with the extra oomph. But I know a lot of people just like the black colour scheme, so we basically brought in some additional plastics, and that means you can do a variety of additional colour schemes if people don't like the original white and blue design.
You need red to go with the new iPhones, you see.
Sorry?
You need red to go with the new iPhones.
Sorry, it's the mic. It's the last bit of your sentence. I'm not.
It will go with the new iPhone. The red.
Oh right, sorry. I'm not an Apple guy, so I have absolutely no idea what a new iPhone looks like. Sorry.
Okay. Right, but I really think you've got to. I think we've got to close this session now, and thank you very much, Andrew.